Aaliyah Grant stood in the cold, polished lobby of Maxwell Industries, clutching a small folder of presentation files in her hands. It was supposed to be a quick stop before she went home, back to the life she was trying to rebuild after Marcus, her husband of 3 years, had drifted away. But as she walked through the lobby, where the floors gleamed like mirrors and the air smelled of expensive leather and cigar smoke, Aaliyah felt a wave of unease settle deep in her chest. This place had never felt like home. The bright marble floors, the gleaming steel walls, and the imposing portrait of Theodore Maxwell, founder of Maxwell Industries and the man who'd built a $90 billion empire from the ground up, didn't remind her of success. They reminded her of wealth, the kind of wealth she would never truly understand, the kind that made her feel small and insignificant every time she walked through these doors. But today, the office lobby felt even colder than usual, and Aaliyah couldn't shake the sense that something was about to shatter. She was here to drop off Marcus's forgotten files, again. She did these little things for him, even when he barely noticed. Even when the love they once shared felt like a distant memory. When Aaliyah entered, the elevator doors had barely closed behind her when she saw them. Marcus stood at the center of the lobby, his back to her, as if he was posing for some twisted family portrait. The image made Aaliyah's heart tighten in her chest. Vanessa, the marketing director who had been throwing herself at Marcus since their engagement, stood beside him with her arm wrapped tightly around his. And standing just behind them, like their shadows, were Marcus's parents, Diane and Harold Grant, the very people who had always treated Aaliyah like she didn't belong. But what really struck Aaliyah, the thing that almost made her drop the files, was the way Marcus looked at her, or rather, the way he didn't. His eyes flickered toward her only for a second, and in that brief moment, Aaliyah could have sworn she saw something. Guilt, maybe? But then Vanessa laughed. The sound echoed through the marble floor, sharp and shrill, and whatever had softened in Marcus's expression turned to ice. The air felt thick, suffocating. Aaliyah barely had time to process the scene before Diane Grant's voice rang out. "Security, remove this beggar from my son's building." Diane's words were as cold as the air in the room. Aaliyah froze. Beggar was the word Diane always used. It made her feel small, as if her love, her sacrifice for Marcus meant nothing. Nothing at all. Marcus, without so much as a glance of remorse, pulled out an envelope from his pocket and, in front of everyone, handed it to Aaliyah. The heavy weight of it hit her chest as she caught the paper. Divorce papers. "I'm done pretending." Marcus's voice was flat, lifeless. "Vanessa's wearing my ring now. We're getting married. You were just a mistake I needed to correct." Vanessa, looking at Aaliyah as though she were a piece of trash, held up her hand, showcasing the massive diamond ring that sparkled in the harsh lighting. "You don't belong here," she said with venom, loud enough for the morning shift employees to hear. Aaliyah's world collapsed, the sting of the words like a slap to her face. Harold Grant, the towering patriarch of the Grant family, stepped forward next, his voice booming like a judge's gavel in the quiet lobby. "She never belonged in our world anyway," he said, his eyes gleaming with judgment. "Look at her. That's what happens when you try to elevate people beyond their station." Aaliyah stood there, her hands trembling as she clutched the divorce papers, but she didn't say a word. She didn't beg for their pity. She didn't argue. She simply turned on her heel and walked out of the building, her head held high, even as her heart shattered into pieces. As she passed Winston, the elderly security guard who had worked at Maxwell Industries for over 40 years, he offered her a look of sympathy. Aaliyah didn't speak to him, but she could tell he knew. He knew the truth that no one else saw. And though it seemed like Aaliyah had lost everything, she couldn't shake the feeling that today was only the beginning. Aaliyah didn't go home that night. Instead, she took a cab to a small diner on the edge of town. She sat at the counter, the fluorescent lights above her buzzing quietly, as she stared at the empty coffee cup in front of her. Every part of her felt exposed, like her soul was laid bare for everyone to see. But she wasn't weak. The truth was, she had been stronger than this. Stronger than Marcus. stronger than the family that had never accepted her. And now, she was starting to realize something she hadn't understood before. She was not just a woman scorned. She wasn't just a victim. She was the heir to everything. The real heir to Maxwell Industries, the company her biological father had built, and she had no idea. Not until now. Aaliyah clutched the silver locket around her neck, the one her grandmother had given her before she died. She had always thought it was a simple memento, something to remind her of the woman who raised her. But now, she knew it held a secret. The locket was more than just a memory. It was the key to everything. Tomorrow, she would find out what that secret was. Tomorrow, she would reclaim everything they tried to steal from her. Tomorrow, she would make them all pay. The next morning, Aaliyah barely slept. The sting of Marcus's betrayal and the weight of the divorce papers he had thrown at her lingered in her mind like a nightmare she couldn't shake off. Yet, as she walked through the cramped corridors of her apartment, the sunlight filtering in from the cracked blinds, a new resolve began to form. Her world, once shattered, was slowly being rebuilt, not by revenge, but by something far stronger, knowledge. Her grandmother's locket now felt like more than just a keepsake. It felt like the key to unlocking the truth, to understanding who she truly was. With a deep breath, she glanced at the old piece of paper she had found in her grandmother's belongings. A letter, yellowed with time, with her mother's handwriting scrawled on it. "Your mother wanted great things for you," Mama Ruth had told her. But great things weren't just about moving up in the world. They were about knowing where you came from, about finding your real place in the world. And, for Aaliyah, that place had always seemed out of reach. Now, the world she thought she knew was beginning to crumble around her, revealing the secrets that had been kept hidden for years. Aaliyah made her way to the small coffee shop down the street, a place she often visited in the early mornings to clear her head. The quiet clink of cups and the low hum of voices provided a fleeting sense of peace. But today, her thoughts were occupied with more than just the steaming cup of coffee in front of her. She had made a decision. Today, she would go to Maxwell Industries. Not as a wife-turned-victim. Not as the woman who had been humiliated in front of everyone who had ever disrespected her. But as the woman who was about to claim her rightful place in the empire her father had built. It was time to meet Theodore Maxwell. The shock of learning he was her father still hadn't fully hit her. The portrait of him at the office, his eyes kind and understanding, had always felt like a guilt-ridden stranger, someone whose face she could never quite place. But now she knew. It had been staring at her all along, waiting to be recognized. Aaliyah knew, deep down, that Theodore didn't have the answers to all the years of pain she had endured. But he was a part of her story, her real story, the one she would soon write herself. At Maxwell Industries, the tall glass doors seemed to mock her. Everything about this building, its imposing design, its cold, sterile lobby, the suit-wearing executives who walked with a certain arrogance, had always been a symbol of what she could never be. Aaliyah Grant, a woman who had been invisible, had never belonged in this world. But now she was ready. As she stepped inside, the familiar marble floors gleamed under the bright lights, the air heavy with the faint scent of luxury. But Aaliyah didn't feel small anymore. She was walking toward her future, and that future was as clear as the sky outside. She approached the front desk, where a nervous-looking assistant greeted her. "Miss Grant," the assistant asked, fidgeting with her pen. "Yes," Aaliyah replied, her voice steady. "I'm here to see Theodore Maxwell." The assistant hesitated. "May I ask what this is about?" Aaliyah didn't flinch. "I'm his daughter. I'm here to meet him." The assistant's eyes widened, her shock evident, but she quickly composed herself. "Please, take a seat. I'll notify him." As Aaliyah sat down, she couldn't help but feel a strange sense of calm. This was it. The moment she had waited for. The moment that would start a chain reaction no one could predict. An hour later, she was led through the tall, imposing hallway toward Theodore's private office. The walls were lined with high-end artwork, and the floor beneath her feet seemed to thrum with the hum of power that filled the building. When the assistant knocked on the door and entered, Aaliyah felt a flutter of nerves she hadn't expected. But this wasn't just about her meeting Theodore. It was about claiming her place in the world that had once rejected her. "Ms. Grant," the assistant said, opening the door. "Mr. Maxwell will see you now." Aaliyah took a deep breath and stepped inside. Theodore Maxwell, now a man in his 70s, was sitting behind a massive desk, his back slightly hunched from age, but still exuding the kind of authority that only decades of building a $90 billion empire could grant. He looked up when she entered, his eyes narrowing as if he were seeing a ghost. "Aaliyah," he said softly, almost as if the name itself held years of grief and hope. His voice cracked with emotion. "I never thought I'd see you." Aaliyah's heart clenched. She had imagined this moment for so long, but nothing had prepared her for the raw vulnerability in his eyes. "I didn't think I'd be here either," Aaliyah replied, her voice trembling slightly despite her best efforts to stay composed. "But I am, and I deserve answers." Theodore stood up, his movements slow but deliberate, as if each step carried the weight of a lifetime. He walked toward her, and for the first time, Aaliyah saw the guilt that had haunted his every decision. "You've always deserved more," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "More than I could ever give you. More than I could protect." He paused, then spoke again, this time softer, his gaze locked onto hers. "You are my daughter, Aaliyah. And for the longest time, I searched for you. I never stopped." Tears welled up in Aaliyah's eyes as the words sank in. Everything she had endured, every moment of pain, every betrayal, it all started to make sense. She wasn't just the woman Marcus had discarded. She wasn't just the woman her in-laws had belittled. She was the daughter of a man who had never stopped searching for her. "I'm sorry," Theodore whispered. "I never wanted you to feel like this." Aaliyah wiped away her tears, shaking her head. "It's not too late," she said. "I'm here now, and I want to know everything." The weeks that followed were a blur. Aaliyah had expected the transition into her new reality to feel like an awakening, a moment of clarity that made everything fall into place. But it didn't feel like that at all. The truth she had spent years yearning for had come at a high price, and now, every step forward felt like walking through a fog. In the days after her meeting with Theodore Maxwell, things started to shift in subtle ways. For one, Aaliyah moved into a small, private apartment near the Maxwell estate, courtesy of Theodore's lawyers. It wasn't lavish like the penthouses she had imagined when she thought of a CEO's daughter, but it was hers. It was her space, and in that, there was a certain comfort. But as she sat in that apartment late one night, staring at the silver locket her grandmother had left her, the weight of it all was suffocating. Marcus, still nowhere to be found, had made his betrayal clear. Vanessa, with her flawless face and her shallow motives, still occupied too much of Aaliyah's thoughts. The woman had taken everything from her, her husband, her dignity, and her place in the life Aaliyah had once thought she would have. Aaliyah's phone buzzed on the table, breaking her train of thought. It was a message from Theodore's lawyer, giving her the details for their next meeting. She had no choice but to attend. It was the only way to officially reclaim her inheritance, her legacy. The meeting was scheduled at Maxwell Industries in one of the boardrooms Theodore had designed, a room meant for decisions that shaped the future. As Aaliyah walked through the building, she felt a sense of unease wash over her. For years, she had stood in this very space, invisible to everyone around her. Now, every step was one that led her toward power, but not the kind of power she had imagined. Inside the boardroom, Theodore was already seated at the table, his fingers resting lightly on the surface. He looked more fragile than the powerful figure she had expected. His graying hair and the deep lines on his face seemed to tell a story of lost years, of moments and decisions that had left their mark on him. "Aaliyah," he said softly when she entered. "You're here. I never thought it would happen like this, but I'm glad it has." Aaliyah nodded, her posture stiff as she took a seat across from him. The table between them felt like a chasm, a gap that had existed for 25 years, a gap that had kept them apart even though their blood was the same. "I'm still processing everything," Aaliyah said, her voice calm but tinged with the confusion she still felt. I wasn't prepared for this. No one ever is, Theodore replied, his tone full of regret. But we can't change the past. We can only move forward. Aaliyah looked at him, searching for the man who had built the empire she now owned, searching for the father she never had. But all she saw was a man who had lost so much. There was a sadness in his eyes, a regret that Aaliyah couldn't quite place, but she could sense it. He was hurting, but so was she. I've spent 25 years building this company, Theodore continued, his voice breaking slightly. But it was never about the money. It was always about the hope that I would find you, that you would come back to me. Aaliyah leaned forward, her hands resting on the table, her fingers brushing against the papers that lay there. And now I'm here, she said, her voice steady but full of uncertainty. But I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to make it right. Theodore let out a sigh. You don't have to fix anything, Aaliyah. You were never the one who needed to be fixed. Aaliyah absorbed his words, letting them settle in her chest like stones in still water. She wasn't sure how to respond. She had spent so long thinking that everything about her life was a mistake. Her marriage, her sacrifices, her invisibility in the Maxwell world. But now she was learning that it wasn't her fault. She hadn't been the one who had caused all the pain. But that didn't mean the pain was gone. It still lingered. As Aaliyah left the meeting, she felt a mix of relief and confusion. Theodore's words echoed in her mind, but they didn't make her feel whole. They didn't fix the hurt that had been planted in her heart when Marcus walked away. She wasn't sure who she was supposed to be anymore. The next morning, as Aaliyah prepared for another meeting at Maxwell Industries, her phone rang. It was an unknown number, but something in her gut told her to answer. Aaliyah Grant. The voice on the other end asked. Yes, she replied, her voice guarded. This is Winston, from Maxwell Industries Security, the voice continued. I have something important to tell you. It's about your father, and I think you need to hear it. Aaliyah's heart skipped a beat. What is it? I'm not sure how much Theodore has told you, Winston said, his tone cautious. But there are things about this company, and your family, that he hasn't shared. I've been here for over 40 years, and I've seen a lot of things. But there's something you need to know. Aaliyah's breath hitched. What is it? I think it's time you knew who really controls Maxwell Industries, Winston said quietly, his voice laced with urgency. You need to come to see me. Aaliyah couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It had been days since her conversation with Winston, the old security guard from Maxwell Industries, and she couldn't get his words out of her mind. She had heard of people being shady, of power struggles behind closed doors, but the way Winston had spoken about her father's empire, there was something darker beneath the surface. The more she thought about it, the more uneasy she felt. She had grown up thinking her life was defined by what she had built with Marcus and his family, dreams that had always seemed out of her reach. But now, she realized, everything she thought she knew was a lie. Her mind kept replaying Winston's final words. I think it's time you knew who really controls Maxwell Industries. What could he possibly mean by that? Theodore Maxwell had always been the head of the company. He built it from the ground up. She had seen him in action, the man who had once promised to make her a part of his world, only for her to be dismissed and forgotten. But what if the truth was more complicated? Aaliyah had no answers, but she knew one thing for sure. She needed to find out what Winston knew. At Maxwell Industries, the day felt different. The energy was shifting, and Aaliyah could feel it as soon as she entered the lobby. The atmosphere was colder, more tense. It was almost as if everyone was waiting for something to happen, waiting for her. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and Aaliyah stepped out onto the familiar polished floors of the boardroom hallway. As she walked toward the security desk, she noticed several new faces, employees who hadn't been there before, all dressed in suits, whispering in the corners. Something was happening at the top, and Aaliyah was determined to find out what. She walked past the receptionist without a word, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floors, and made her way to the back of the building, where the security office was located. Winston was waiting for her. The small security office felt out of place in such a grand building. dimly lit, with a small desk cluttered with papers and monitors displaying various areas of the building. Winston was sitting behind his desk, his thick glasses perched low on his nose, as he sifted through a stack of files. "You made it," he said, looking up at Aaliyah. His face, usually a calm mask, now looked weary, like a man who'd seen too much but couldn't do anything about it. "What's going on, Winston?" Aaliyah asked, trying to keep her voice steady, though a part of her felt like she was walking into a trap. She didn't trust this place. She didn't trust anyone here, except Winston, it seemed. He gestured for her to take a seat, and she sat down slowly, her eyes scanning the cluttered room. "I don't know how much you know about your father's dealings," Winston began, his voice low and cautious. "But there's more to Maxwell Industries than what you see on the surface. A lot more." Aaliyah's chest tightened. "What do you mean?" "My father built this empire. I've been part of this company my whole life. He's always been the one in charge." Winston shook his head, his hand shaking slightly as he pushed a file toward her. "That's what they want you to think. But your father was never the true head of Maxwell Industries. There's someone else, a man who's been pulling the strings from the shadows. The power in this company has always been hidden behind closed doors. Your father was just a figurehead." Aaliyah stared at him, the words sinking into her like cold water. She had spent her whole life in the shadow of the man she thought was her father, and now this stranger was telling her that the man she had built her identity around was nothing more than a puppet. "This man, the one behind the scenes," Winston continued, "he's been running things for years. And he's the one who decided to hide you away." Aaliyah felt as if the ground beneath her feet was crumbling. "Who is he?" she demanded. "Who's been running my father's empire?" Winston hesitated, his eyes darting to the door as if making sure no one was listening. "Theodore Maxwell wasn't your real father. He was a businessman, yes, but your real father is someone else. Someone you've been blind to your entire life." Aaliyah's world tilted. Theodore wasn't her real father? She felt the air leave her lungs as she processed his words. The man who had always been a stranger to her, the man she thought was an ally, was the very man who had betrayed her from the start. She shook her head, unable to make sense of what Winston was saying. "That can't be true. My father, he would have told me. I would have known." Winston leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. "You were never meant to know. Your real father made sure you were kept hidden, kept in the dark. You're not the daughter of Theodore Maxwell. You're the daughter of the man who owns this company." The revelation had been too much to process in one sitting. Aaliyah's mind was spinning, her thoughts racing through the maze of confusion and hurt. She had come to Maxwell Industries seeking answers, but instead, she was left with more questions than ever. The truth about her father, or rather, the man who wasn't her father, was a weight she could no longer ignore. Theodore Maxwell, the man she had believed to be her father, was nothing more than a figurehead, a man chosen to build an empire, but not the true architect of her destiny. That revelation sent shockwaves through her entire identity. The man she had spent her entire life believing was her anchor was now a ghost, a symbol of a legacy she had never been a part of. Winston's words lingered in her mind. "You're the daughter of the man who owns this company." But who was he? Who was the true heir to Maxwell Industries? Aaliyah needed to know. The only thing she understood now was that the past had been a lie, and she had to uncover the truth, not just for herself, but for the future she was starting to realize she was entitled to. As Aaliyah sat in the same diner she had visited countless times before, the worn-out coffee cup in front of her felt like a piece of her old life, small and insignificant. But everything had changed now. She wasn't the woman who had once walked into this world of wealth and power uninvited. She belonged here, or rather, she was meant to. Her phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Winston. "Meet me at the office tonight. I have something important to show you." Aaliyah's heart skipped a beat. She had known this meeting was coming, though she hadn't expected it to be so soon. She was nervous, but also driven by a newfound sense of purpose. Tonight, she would learn who her real father was, and why her life had been manipulated from the start. Back at Maxwell Industries, the building felt different. The polished marble floors and gleaming walls had once seemed so imposing, but now they seemed like mere backdrops to the drama that had unfolded in her life. Aaliyah had spent years trying to belong in a world that had never been hers, and now, she realized, this world had always belonged to her. She walked past the sleek, glass-walled offices, the voices of high-powered executives barely reaching her ears as they spoke about the latest acquisitions or profit margins. It didn't matter now. All of it was hers, and if the world didn't realize it yet, they would. As she reached the elevator, she hesitated for a moment. The doors opened with a soft ding, and she stepped inside. Her reflection stared back at her in the polished steel, but this time, it wasn't the woman she had seen before. The image of Aaliyah Grant, broken, overlooked, was no longer there. Now, all she saw was the woman who was about to claim everything. When Aaliyah arrived at the security office, Winston was waiting for her. His face was more solemn than before, his usually confident demeanor replaced by a look of concern. "You came," he said, his voice low. "I had no choice," Aaliyah replied. "I need to know the truth." Winston motioned for her to sit. "It's not what you think. Your father, the man you've been calling Theodore Maxwell, wasn't a businessman, Aaliyah. He was a cover, a front. Theodore Maxwell had no idea you were his daughter." Aaliyah's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean? What does that have to do with Maxwell Industries?" Winston pulled out a thick file from the drawer, the pages inside worn and yellowed with age. "Your real father is the one who truly controls this empire. The one who's been in charge all along." Aaliyah's mind spun. She reached for the file, flipping through the papers as Winston spoke, but nothing could prepare her for the name she would find there. "His name is David Maxwell, your grandfather's brother. He disappeared years ago, but he's been the mastermind behind everything. Your father, Theodore, was only a part of the plan. David always intended for you to inherit, but he needed to keep it secret until the right moment." Aaliyah felt the floor beneath her feet shift. Her world had never been real. The family she thought she had, the man she thought she knew, it had all been constructed to keep her from the truth. David Maxwell, her real father, was a man hidden in the shadows, orchestrating everything from afar. "This isn't real," Aaliyah whispered, the weight of the truth threatening to crush her. "I've spent my whole life believing in a lie." Winston looked at her with sympathy. "I know this is a lot, Aaliyah, but it's the truth. Your grandfather's will, the company's records, they're all pointing to you. You are the rightful heir to Maxwell Industries. You belong here." Aaliyah stood up, her mind racing. Everything she had been through, the humiliation by Marcus, the betrayal by her family, it had all led her to this moment. It was no longer about finding retribution. It was about claiming what was rightfully hers. But the truth wasn't the only thing she had to face. There was still one more piece of the puzzle. David Maxwell wasn't the only person who had been pulling strings. Her enemies, Marcus, his family, and even Vanessa, were still out there, still trying to keep her from claiming her birthright. Aaliyah stood at the window of her small apartment, watching the city lights twinkle below. The weight of everything she had learned in the past few days felt like it was pressing on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Her real father, David Maxwell, had been pulling the strings from the shadows, a ghost in her life, controlling everything from behind the scenes. Theodore, the man she had believed to be her father, had been nothing more than a pawn in a game she didn't even know she was playing. But now, everything had changed. She was no longer a passive observer in her life. She was an heir to a billion-dollar empire, and that came with power, a power she had yet to fully understand. The anger she had felt when Marcus abandoned her still burned inside her, but now it was focused, more controlled. She wasn't just angry at Marcus and Vanessa for what they'd done. She was angry at the world for keeping her in the dark for so long. Aaliyah Grant was no longer a victim. She was the one who would bring the truth to light. The phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Winston. "Meet me at the old Maxwell estate. It's time to take back what's yours." Her heart raced. This was the moment. The meeting with Winston had been coming for weeks, but now, It felt like the final piece of her journey was about to fall into place. Maxwell Industries was hers, not just because of blood, but because she had the strength to claim it. As Aaliyah walked through the gates of the Maxwell estate, the grandiose mansion stood before her like a towering reminder of everything she had been denied. The estate felt familiar and foreign at the same time, intimidating yet inviting. She had always felt like an outsider in this world, but now, she was about to step inside and take what was hers by right. The front door opened, and Winston was waiting for her. He looked different now, more resolute than before. There was no turning back for any of them. "You've made it," Winston said, his voice deep and calm. "This is the heart of the company. It's where the decisions have always been made." Aaliyah looked around the vast entrance hall, the marble floors shining beneath the chandeliers. This wasn't just a home, it was a symbol of power. And now it was hers. They walked together through the mansion, past rooms filled with luxurious furniture and expensive paintings, but Aaliyah wasn't distracted by the opulence. She was focused, each step bringing her closer to her goal. She could feel her heart pounding, the adrenaline surging through her veins. Finally, they arrived at the study, the heart of Maxwell Industries. It was where David Maxwell had made his decisions, where his legacy had been formed. Aaliyah stood in the doorway, staring at the desk where her father had made his mark on the world. The moment felt surreal. This was where her power began. Winston stepped inside first. "David knew you were coming, Aaliyah. He knew that someday, you'd be ready to claim this." Aaliyah stepped into the room, her heels clicking against the polished wood. She approached the desk, every inch of her body now aligned with purpose. "I'm ready," she said quietly, but with an authority that felt foreign yet familiar. "I'm here to take back what's mine." Winston handed her a key, a symbolic key to Maxwell Industries, but also something much more significant. It was the key to her identity, the key to who she was meant to be. "There's one thing you need to understand," Winston said, his voice low. "David Maxwell was more than just your father. He was a man who understood power, real power, but he made mistakes. His biggest one was keeping you in the dark. But now, it's time for you to step into the light." Aaliyah took the key in her hand, feeling the cold metal against her skin. This was it. She had the key to the empire, to the legacy that had been denied her. But it wasn't just about claiming wealth. It was about taking control of a life that had never been hers until now. The next morning, Aaliyah made her way to Maxwell Industries. As she stepped into the building, the doors opened for her. She wasn't just another billionaire's wife anymore. She was the heir, and everyone would know it soon enough. She walked past the familiar lobby, where security guards and high-powered executives once ignored her. But today, she wasn't invisible. Today, she was the woman who would reclaim what was always hers. Aaliyah took the elevator up to the executive floor, the walls lined with glass and chrome, all designed to remind her of what she had never had access to. But now, the building felt like home, like the beginning of her reign. As she entered the boardroom, she was greeted by the board members, the men and women who had run Maxwell Industries with an iron fist for years. The room was filled with murmurs, but as Aaliyah walked to the head of the table, everything fell silent. One of the senior executives stood, his voice trembling with surprise. "Ms. Grant," he said, "I didn't expect you to. You didn't expect me at all, did you?" Aaliyah cut him off, her voice sharp and commanding. "Well, here I am. I'm taking control of Maxwell Industries." The room was still. Every eye was on her. She could feel the weight of their stares, the disbelief, the shock, but also the recognition. They finally saw her for who she was, the woman who would lead. "I'm here to make changes," Aaliyah said, her voice unwavering. "And it starts now." The truth was out. Aaliyah Grant had arrived, and she wasn't leaving until she had taken what was hers.